Listeners, just coming out of Black History Month, we're in Women's History Month. So when I say those two things, Black History Month, Women's History Month, what are the images that come to your mind? What are the thoughts that you have? What stories have you heard about women's history or Black history? Come on in and let's discuss it.
Yeah, Jody, your question is interesting because I have a lot of thoughts, girl.
I know you do. I know you do.
Man, a lot of images come to my brain. You know, as a Black woman, I know, this is going to be juicy. This is going to be juicy. But before I go into my answer, I would love to introduce our guest today. Would you all share with our audience who you two are?
Absolutely. My name is Heidi. I am a strategist at a local agency. I am also a wedding planner alongside my sister. A couple other titles. I am a wife and a mom to a 1-year-old. I have known Jody for most of my life, so we have had a lot of opportunities to have conversations like this. In the last 10 years, we probably worked together in more of a professional context,
wow.
and so that's sort of led us to where we are today.
That's cool.
Happy to be here.
Absolutely.
And my name is Amy. I'm a wedding planner alongside my sister. I'm also a NICU nurse and pursuing my doctorate in midwifery. Outside of that, I'm a wife and a mom to 15-month-old twins. And Jody happens to be my godmom, so I'm excited to dive into these conversations with her and the rest of you.
Well, hold on. You have to, this nickery. Okay, say that again. You're a NIC nurse and a what? A midwifery. Talk about just a little bit on that, just so our audience knows.
Yeah,
'cause that's awesome.
I'm a NICU nurse, so working with the little babies after they're born and need a little extra support.
Aww.
And then I'm pursuing my doctorate in midwifery, so I will be caring for women throughout their lifespan and attending births.
I love that, especially because we're talking about Black history, and Black women have the highest health disparities, especially when it comes to reproduction. So that's awesome. Welcome, ladies. We're so happy that you happy to have them.
Oh my gosh.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm happy. It's my girls.
Oh, that is so sweet. Now this question. Well, I just want to hop in to kick this off with saying, you know, Black history is world history. Let's just say what it is, right? Dinknesh, the 3.2 million year old bones, right? They're the oldest bones found, like just by itself. Let's just sit with that by itself, right? That's something that I know I wasn't taught in school, and I don't think y'all was taught in school, and I definitely don't think you was taught in school.
No.
You know what I'm saying? So I
didn't even know there was bones that old, but then that black, right?
Yeah. From Ethiopia.
Yeah.
Right? And so today I'm excited because we're talking differently about this topic.
Yeah.
And we're talking about rising tides lifting all boats, meaning all of us doing this work, not just Black people, but all of us doing this internal work so that we can get to some self-mastery, both personally and collectively. And so, you know, that says freedom. That says freedom for a lot of us. So on this podcast, we are building capacity in this way. So I'm excited to be building this capacity individually, in our communities, as well as in our institutions, and laying this foundation of how our capacity builders can support this or can get involved with this. So Jody, what you thinking?
You got me thinking of a lot of things. I love that you started with Black history is world history. Like, because I think for many Americans and many white Americans, we think Black history very narrow.
Yep.
Very, you know, Dr. Martin Luther King comes to, I think, a lot of listeners' minds as well as mine. When you think Black history, you know, you think of 3 to 5 highly publicized Black people in history that have fought, and most of them during civil rights.
Yep.
We don't even go further
than that.
Yeah. Back. So to blow it up and say Black history is world history, I love that. And absolutely, as you know, we're always trying to frame these conversations in a way to let people know that we're all in this together.
Absolutely.
And so when that tide rises, the whole boat rises. But that also means then that Black history is my history.
Absolutely.
It's as well as your history. And so if you're a listener right now, it doesn't matter what color skin you are. If Black history is all of our history. And women history is all of it. Doesn't matter what gender you are. If you listen, it's all of our history. Because as great as women, we could talk about our history all day long, but we also need men not just to understand the history, but the impacts of that history.
Ooh, that's
and
good.
not just how it impacts us. I mean, that's nice if men want to understand that, but then how does it impact them?
Yes.
Because, and then for Black history, same thing. It's like, I, as a white person, have to understand Black history is my history. Hear how it impacts Black history impacts you as Black women, but then also what are those impacts for me as a white woman? Because if I don't understand that, we continue to repeat history almost unconsciously.
Jody, I love how you said that. You're spot on. So like one of the things in Project Diva International that we talk to the girls about is there's this article, there's a couple of them that talk about what would life be like without Black people. And it talks about all the inventions. It talks about the patents. It talks about like going through a day and trying to live your life without all of those inventions and patents from Black people. Like it would be a hot mess.
And I know you've taught me when we've had conversations how many Black women had patents in the 1800s.
Absolutely. And
that,
before.
Yeah, and before that, and we don't often know about that or highlight that. So the contributions that everybody in our history has made, but specifically Black women. Yeah. And the other thing as we think about this, the Black history is world history. Black history does include everyone, no matter what your skin color is, especially here in America, because it's a part of our history. So it affects us all. And we also, I think we have to remind ourselves, though I'm excited to have you all of you here, is that Black history isn't one history. Because like I said, a lot of times I think in white America, when we hear Black history, we got 4 or 5, very publicized civil rights leaders that we put on it, or maybe one before or after. And we often look at it as one mono type of picture, just a singular picture.
Absolutely.
Where you three are all women, all Black, all in America, but Black history, you have different histories with this. And so I'm going to turn it over to you to share a little bit about your stories and your history as Black women here in America.
That's cool.
Yeah. Our history, Amy and I are first generation immigrants. So our parents moved to Minnesota from Nigeria just over 30 years ago.
Oh, wow.
And they came here to pursue advanced degrees. So much of our childhood and so much of that alone shapes who we are completely. It impacts not only our childhood, but the way that we show up, the circles that we ran in growing up, if you can say that, our parents' connections, our parents' relationships, and how that sort of shaped our lives, our culture, what is or is not, how deep our culture runs, and what parts of being Nigerian were present in our daily lives when we were younger, are present now. It completely shapes not only our experience, but the way that we show up in the world, the way that we are treated, the way that we interpret situations, the way we even think about Black history in America. So,
and I think an important part also is that our parents came here and then had to study and take a citizenship exam. And although we were young, it's one of like my earlier memories is watching how rigorous of a process that was and how serious they took it, rightfully so. And so I think even bearing witness to that has impacted a lot of how I see Black history and how I see who I am living in America.
And I just want to give a shout out because that's how I know you two is your mom. We went to the same college to get our masters and we met each other. And, within a semester, professors would not allow us to sit next to each other and really wanted us not to have classes together. But you're watching your mom and dad go through the process. I mean, that's a side note, but I think it's so relevant today because immigration and immigrant is a big topic in America. And if you've never watched the process that people have to go through to become a U.S. citizen, I would ask all listeners to do so because I got a new huge profound respect for your mom and dad and everything they went through and how hard they would study and everything they were doing so that they could become a citizen. And sometimes when I hear people talk about that process, make light of it, I'm just like, oh no, that's not been my experience at all. So that's a side note, but I had to throw it out there because, yeah.
That's good. And I know for me, listening to you all's story about immigration and being an American African, it's interesting how limiting our experience is, because you all come over and you go through the process, you come with a different language, you learn another language, right? Whereas we're normally just one language. And we may travel outside the country. Some of us never leave the country, right? And so there's this gap of expansion that I think American Africans miss, and still feel to a certain degree a certain superiority even over Africans when you come in, because we've been here, right? Like there's this whole dynamic there that I don't think the world understands, because they look at us as all being Black.
Mm-hmm. And I think that everything that you're describing, it gets at the complexity of it all.
Exactly.
Because you're describing so much from our experience. And to your point, society doesn't address or acknowledge that nuance, but it is felt. I feel like even growing up, we probably couldn't put words to what we were feeling.
We couldn't either.
And it also impacts where you feel comfortable, who you feel comfortable with, even if it is amongst other folks who are Black. And so it's everything that you're saying is exactly right. And it just is touching on what we're going to dive into in this conversation, but so much of the complexity lives in the nuance.
Let's keep talking, man. Let's
so
dive
much
in.
of it is like society puts us all in the same box, and so we're sitting in this box and we can tell we're different, and we can tell that our experiences are both all valid, but we almost don't even know what to do with it or how to dig deeper into it, because we're just being told we are Black, and we're just trying to operate in the world that we exist in, and it almost doesn't allow us time to
it doesn't allow us time,
the intersectionality of it.
So right, so true. Well, where do y'all want to take the conversation? Where do we want to start?
Yeah, one thing I would love to talk about more is hair, because I feel like as the child of an immigrant, we always were so focused on assimilation, and so we wanted our hair to be as straight as it could possibly be. We wanted it to be as similar to our peers as possible. And like, I remember we had a hair straightener, even though our hair was braided all the way till the end, but we still had to run it over with the hair straightener as if we were doing anything at all, or wearing headbands, even though we had no flyaways and we had no reason to wear them because that's what other people were doing. So I feel like I spent so much of my life trying to make my hair look similar to others. It wasn't until deep in my 20s that I finally experimented with my natural hair and doing things that I had never done before, just to see if that felt authentic to me, because I had never tried it up until that point.
Yeah, it is so funny the extent or how deep messages can go, because to your point, no flyaways and we're wearing headbands. And it's, as adults, it was such a mental shift to be like, what does it look like if I celebrate my hair? Like, instead of trying to form fit it to what I see on TV and magazines, whatever it is, I started to experiment with color, with length, doing all of these things that are like, this is more uniquely me. This isn't me trying to fit whatever it is I was trying to. So I feel like hair is a great example, because it is a journey, but it's such a visceral thing that we can all probably point to a million messages we've taken in about not just hair, but Black women's hair specifically.
We joke in Project Diva, it's the Black woman's hair journey. Like, it is a real thing. I didn't even see my natural curl until my 40s. And even then it was a hop in, hop out, because it was like, this is not cute though. Like, I'm used to the straight, and I'm used to, being able to feather it, or, whatever the end look from the barrage of messages that compared our hair to white women's hair. Right. And so it's just really cool to hear you all being younger and like moving into that authentic space of learning. Like I'm now in my 50s and this is the longest I've worn my natural hair. And I did it because the girls that were in middle school and high school in Project Diva are so bold with it now that it was like, well, if they can do it, shoot, I'm about to be cute as heck with my hair, you know? But it is those messages around like, it's so universal for Black women, no matter where you're from. And then it's like that double-edged sword, because there's one thing for us to feel some kind of way, but then there's another thing for others to feel bold enough to then touch it, to then to want to touch it. Like that's the biggest thing for Black women, right? Is like always getting into our circles and being like, girl, she tried to touch my, you know what I'm saying? Like she tried to touch my hair. And so really working to not default to today is a bad hair day, I should throw on a long 10-inch wig, right? Because my hair is not cute or it's not acting quote unquote right. And the other thing is, how hard has it been for y'all to find products?
Very hard.
Man, right? Like you got to go. I think I have probably like $1,000 worth of product just sitting in my closet because you try one, you have to pay $15 for it, and then it doesn't work. So now you're on to the next product. And so you have all of these things, right? And that's a part of the Black girl hair journey, or the Black woman hair journey that is one of the most self-esteem, because our crowns mean so much to us, right? And it's one of those spaces that definitely is universal amongst us all. And there is something between us and white women when it comes to our hair that is that superior inferiority thing that I think all of us are still wrapping our minds around and really fighting through on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm. And I want to start by saying thank you guys for sharing your experiences. And this is where Black history is all of our history. So as listeners, as we listen to these stories, if I hear that, you guys have a different history as Black women in this country, and yet there's a commonality like with regarding hair. And it's not enough for someone like myself who hasn't experienced what you guys have experienced, and that tends to be, if you're European, you tend not to have experienced this. It's not enough to go, oh, I'm sorry that happens. We have to deepen our awareness and understand why it happened in the first place. And we've talked about in other episodes, we will put more asset-based descriptors more frequently on normalized dominant identities. And identities that are not normalized dominant, we will use then deficit more often or more frequently. And again, listeners, is not to say that we never put deficit on a normalized dominant, on white women's hair, but that it's not as frequent. And so what becomes then the viewed as the best or more positive is hair that you're more likely to have if you are white, straight. You both mentioned straight hair. And so if I understand that as a white woman, and I understand that for a Black woman there is often a hair journey, then right there would prevent me from ever thinking to touch another woman's hair, right? But we have to have that awareness and understand why those messages existed and how impactful they are. So I really appreciate you guys sharing your individual stories, because I think you're being vulnerable, and and I don't want to lose the opportunity that this is all of our history, and so we all have work to do. Because what I heard you say, Nita, I heard all of you say you're on this journey. And and in that journey, the double-edged sword of getting these hurtful messages about your hair, but then, balancing ultimately on the other side of that, the hurtful messages is you built resiliency and power. Absolutely. And now there's pride and power and resiliency that, quite frankly, I don't think I'll ever know about regarding my hair. Do you know what I mean?
I agree with that. And I think we need to make it a little bit more plain too, right? Because when you think about me and you are a little older than, a little more seasoned than these young ladies. You know what I'm saying?
Some would say wise. Y'all are wiser, wiser. There's some English for you, right?
So when you were growing up and you entered into the workforce, right? We were in the generation where you had to wear black or blue suits, right? Slacks or skirt. And then you had to wear your hair a certain way. So when You like did you ever look on like lookups like what's appropriate hairstyles?
No, but I know I think I've talked about that on other episodes. If you just put in Google professional hair, it's always white hair that comes up.
Exactly.
I mean, the messages are everywhere.
Right.
You
So that's
know?
what I wanted people to like our audience to understand, like connect the dots, right? It's not we're just talking about it to be talking about it. Like it literally is like there's our message and then there's y'all message.
Yep.
Right. And so like when we have to deal with the messages,
but don't
like
have
you said,
to.
you never do.
You don't have to.
Exactly.
And that's the benefit of being that normalized dominant is we don't have to become aware. We don't have to become more resilient. We don't have to, go through this journey that you went through, because every turn I look, what people are wearing in their hair makes sense to me because we got flyaways. You know what I mean? Every turn and if you Googled, and so that gets into, I'm going to jump a little,
Go for it.
but of what listeners, what can we do? That's one. Go to Google and put in professional hair. And now it's gotten a lot better, but if they still, or put in unprofessional hair, if you put in unprofessional hair, that's when it gets oftentimes used to be braids and click it and say it's an inaccurate, it's little things like that though to say, hey, no, we're not going to accept this image. We're not going to accept this.
I mean, even down to the point where there's certain states that
that's where I was going.
Let's go.
See right there. I got this. Right. But I was looking up, only listeners, look up your state. Do you have the Crown Act in place? Because only 27 states have the Crown Act.
Why do we have to have a Crown Act?
Exactly. That's the other thing is does your state have a Crown Act, which is an act that says you can't get discriminated because of how you wear your hair. But then the bigger question is, why do we even have to have that? And where does this come from? Mm-hmm. And this isn't something that is back in the day. If this is our history, it's our history. Because I know for myself, I will hear a lot of folks, I think I can say, well, I don't think my people own slaves. I mean, we've been here since you could homestead in Minnesota. We're coming to you from Minnesota, one side of my family. And so we've been here that long. I don't think we've owned slaves, but that's not the point. Just this because, my family didn't own slaves that I'm aware of, and it happened a long time ago, we will then think there's no residue or there's nothing going on today because of it. Mm-hmm. And it's like, once we understand this is our history and we gain awareness, it's like, those things did happen. Might not have been my ancestors, might have, that I'm aware of it, might not, but it's still my history. And because it went on, here's how it affects my community members today, my sisters today. Mm-hmm. And so getting that awareness, I really appreciate the hair example, but I got to turn it back over to you. What are other things that you guys were thinking?
Yeah, I think just wrapping up on that super quick, it's super important that we've built capacity as individuals. Mm-hmm. And then like you start to see like at the community level, the capacity
like,
increases.
Girl, I love your hair.
And then exactly.
You're so excited to see the
as
natural.
we come into our power there, then it's when the institutions realize that they have to adjust. So it's interesting to see like that step as we take a step up the ladder and the capacity increases, moving from individuals to institutions.
I love that you just brought that up, because also in some conversations we've had outside of this podcast, when we think about like Black women aren't some of them aren't even caring about the corporations anymore, mm-hmm. right? Like, you don't like my hair? Well, I'll just go open up the business. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? So it's to the point now where we have been what did y'all say? Resistant? What's the word y'all said? Resilient.
There you go.
I don't even like that word, but okay, resilient, right? We just are owning who we are. Mm-hmm. And at this point in history, even though it is still happening, like you said, and a lot of people don't want to acknowledge that, we are not in the same headspace. Right. To where we're like, oh my gosh, there's this fear of it. We're just like, not so much even fighting back. It's like, cool, do you? Yep. You know what I'm saying? I'm going to be over here.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see that more and more. And I want to, Amy, what you said is, I don't want to say you're forced, but when you get those messages about your hair, you either get swallowed up by those messages, I would assume, yes. or you get more resilient and you build your capacity. Mm-hmm. And that's what I hear all of you doing. Mm-hmm. And then the question for listeners, if this isn't our journey, your journey, come on, then are we becoming aware of those messages? And then are we building our capacity And so that when we show up into institutions, we have more awareness and we set them up differently.
Yes.
Because it's not your responsibility on your own to set up an institution differently. It's all of ours because this is our history. Yeah.
Exactly.
And I feel like building on what you're describing, so much of, and I kind of want to go back to the example of someone touching my hair. When I was younger, I honestly didn't mind because I was like, oh, like you're curious about my hair. Like, yeah, you can touch it. Like it was, I don't know the word. I liked being able to appease other people in that interaction. And getting older, I started to unpack why it didn't feel complimentary, for example, especially when people don't ask so often. The discomfort of someone just coming up and touching you, and in unlearning sort of that acceptance of that, there's just there's so many assumptions and just so much bias in the way that that those situations were approached. And go ahead.
I was just going to say how the fakeness of our hair was always pointed out, and we were always interrogated, oh, how long do you sit in a chair to get that done? And then,
oh my gosh, the questions.
More recently in my life, realizing that so many white women do use extensions and do sit in salons
I never knew that until like my 40s.
Hours.
Like, oh my, that's an extension? That ain't a real hair? And they've been talking about us for this long?
Something that
my
made me feel
gosh.
so alienated is now just so welcomed, and honestly like becoming a dominant trait for so many.
Just thinking of Ariana Grande, her lyrics when she's like, "You like my hair? Gee, thanks, just bought it."
Yeah,
and
like
the first time I heard that, I was like, "Wait."
Yeah, the ability to claim it.
Samesies.
Like it's no longer something that must be hidden.
Yeah.
But I want to take that point too, because I can hear people say, when you said about people touching your hair, I can hear specifically white women go, well, I wouldn't mind if someone touched my hair. And what we want to remember is when you're sharing that example, it's not just that moment, it's all the history that goes with it.
All the times it's happened.
All the times, all
To one
the
person.
all the times it happened to that individual, and then the history that it represents.
Yes.
And so that's when I hear someone say, well, I wouldn't mind if someone touched my hair. It's like, that's beautiful. And could you understand why she might? And because once we understand the history, just the historical, how over years as a country, the history regarding hair, but then the individual experience, that gives me more awareness. That deepens my capacity to go, I can keep my hands to myself. I believe I was taught that in kindergarten.
And I love that you said that, because what it boils down to is superiority over inferiority, right? Why do you feel that you are superior enough to just touch or even ask to touch, right? My hair. Why would you feel I'm different than you, right? We do have differences, but there's this respect level that still needs to be there that the history, like you're saying, has not afforded Black women.
Nita, girl, your point is just so powerful and so complex. And for listeners, you're really getting at, when I talk in the book about, okay, what are the identities we hold? And then what messages are we sent because of that? How do we internalize that? And then how does that affect how we operate in the world? And when you don't have to, when you're getting positive messages that are afforded to you, right? We're getting the positive messages, then you often don't have to be aware.
Absolutely.
I don't have to be aware of hair. Like I look on Google, it matches. So women that are listening right now, I want you to think about men. How many times have you sat next on an airplane or somewhere else where a man sits next to you and they do the whole man spreading thing, right? And they take up 45, and it's one thing to do it. I'm on an airplane and it happens all the time, but it's another, I am flabbergasted with how unaware. Like I will have a guy sit down, spread his legs, put his, and he's touching me. He's all up on my meats, and I'm like, you buying me a drink? You need to buy me a drink. Okay. I'm verbal. I'm like, and I'm taking a magazine and throwing it in between and they just looking at me like, what? Like what?
Yes.
And it's because they have been sent a message that they can, and John on another episode had talked about that. Being a white male, I was sent a message that I can go where I want to go when I want to go there, and I will be okay, and I can just show up. And so I don't blame that guy. Get like, okay, but his capacity is low.
That's good.
And his awareness is low. And now take that example and apply it here. And so at the same time a man will do that to me, I might do that as a white woman to a black woman regarding hair. If I don't know that black history is all of our history, if I don't understand what you've had to go through with that, then out of my messages I've been sent, I think I have the right to touch your hair. Not realizing, hold up, who else do we think we can touch? Would you go ahead and touch a bald man's head? Right? I mean, I kind of want to know how smooth it is. Some of those kind of look wavy, but why don't I? Because we just laughed. The thought of, touching a bald, and I was thinking of a white bald man when I was saying it too, their head is like, no, we wouldn't do that. And so how I like that word about, you're not afforded the thoughts of that respect and knowing the history, like know our history, know what we've been through, and that might change how you show up. Yeah. Thank you for that.
Absolutely. Respect our bubbles.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that's good. Kind of talking about who else would you like reach out and touch, I think of, it feels animalistic. It feels like you would pet a dog. And I had that similar experience growing up with different foods. And I was so scared to take the foods like jollof rice to school because it just opens this invitation for people to like look at you and watch you and ask questions. And the whole thing feels so like you're just being watched. It feels like you're an animal.
Well, you're on display is what I hear.
When you're just merely trying to exist. And that's a common theme.
Yes. So you're in your 20s or 30s?
20s.
So I have a baby girl. She's a junior in high school. And we just had this conversation. She runs our podcast. She's our host on our podcast in Project Diva International. And she has a whole episode on mystery meat, right? So she's talking about the school food, right? And she's from, I want to say Nigeria. But she was saying like she would love to take her food to school, but because of the embarrassment of the same reason, this is like a couple of weeks ago, we had this same conversation. So imagine this is when you were in school, right? Versus now, or even going to work, right? It's again, it's not in the past. It's now. It's not history. It's happening, right? And so again, with the awareness, I love how you brought that up because people need to expand their awareness.
Exactly. I think this is how these things persist, is like when that community level capacity remains low. It's the capacity for things that are different than you, things that you're not familiar with.
Yeah.
And then how you handle those situations. If something doesn't meet what you expect, or if something doesn't meet what you're used to, it's your next step from there, how you treat those.
And are we teaching our kids that? Because I talk about all the time human nature. If I see something that is outside of my experience, I will often react, and within that reaction, judge. And so I don't think kids just had all curious, neutral questions. I think that they had questions, and then there was judgment, right? And so are we teaching our kids that? Because I with my little guy, human. He sees something outside of his, he's like, oh, that's gross. And I'm like, hold up. I always tell him, hit the pause button. You saw something different. Different doesn't mean deficit, doesn't mean negative. So how let's say that again, and let's look at it again. And he's like, and so helping him reword so that he would hopefully show up differently when he sees food that is different from what he's eating.
Get a different perspective.
So are we using our awareness to help our children build capacity and awareness, and make sure that we're not putting a difference on a display,
And I love how you said that too, not to interrupt your wisdom, but also sometimes it's not from embarrassment. It's from picking your battles too. Because as Black women, again, it'd be so many things coming at you, or as Black girls in school, so many things coming at you. It's like, I'm not really embarrassed. I love my food, but I don't even feel like dealing with the kids today. You know what I'm saying? I don't even feel like dealing with the coworkers today.
And again, I think for me, we have to hear that, because a lot of times I can hear white women or just people say, well, I would just tell them I love this and da-da-da. right if you've received other positive messages. If you haven't had to have someone touch you on the head earlier that day, or mention your hair, or you know, so that's a benefit of being able to pick your battles as well, is how often and frequently are you being put on display because of what is perceived as a difference.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I feel
That's
like
good.
I really want to underscore that, because we can talk about this experience from our perspective, but when these pieces are absent,
Come on.
when we don't have that awareness and how people are responding to us, that leads to you completely shut those parts of yourself off.
Yes.
And that can manifest in a bunch of ways, but when those spaces aren't created, you are only getting a fraction of someone's self.
Come on.
It is what you're describing with being on display. You don't want that. And so you don't even give yourself the opportunity to show up that way. You don't give other people the opportunity to hopefully show up better. Like it goes deep. And the duration of that, sometimes we talk about our authentic self in this context. You normalize behaviors that you do. Like, we never took food. Like, that was just part of our narrative. Regardless of if we wanted to or not, we normalize this. We normalize showing up in a way where people are going to ask the fewest amount of questions, where you're not going to have to defend yourself, where you're not going to have to over justify your actions. Or if you want to, you've already had to do the work to think of the justification, to think of. And it's so much. And so I think in what you're describing with people hearing that, I think it's nice to know the work being done on the other side to manage that exchange, for the fact that so much of that probably isn't on the other person's mind.
Hence, Black women having the highest health disparities and the 182% suicide rate for Black girls since 2001, right? Because when we can't show up our full selves, it affects our souls, right?
Right.
Jody, you were going to say something?
Well, I can't after that. I mean, that's the result of not being able to show up with yourself. We're losing our babies. And then I just think about, for those of us who are employers, you know, hearing you can't show up with your whole self, then I'm not getting all your creativity in all of who you are. And then hearing all the work that you are doing, you're already having all this conversation of how you're going to show up so that you get the least amount of questions. Where because of our Black history and having the white skin, I have that benefit of just showing up, you know, and often getting the benefit of the doubt if something doesn't go well. Yeah, I don't have to put all that thought in.
It's important because, like, our diversity, as Nita said way earlier, is like a rising tide raises all ships.
Yeah.
And so we don't want to mute the differences, as you spoke about, like a child and having these curiosities. Like, the beauty of becoming an adult and your brain developing is we don't want to lose that curiosity, but we want to, like, infuse it with respect, because the foods that we eat, our hair, what we bring to places is so important, and we want to talk about it, and we want people to be aware of it, and we want it to be present, not muted, but it's having respectful approaches that don't just feel like you're being seen with a magnifying glass, but more so that you're a part of the conversation.
Or that people are curious because you are different, instead of being curious because they want to learn something, or it's fast. Like, instead of it being a pure curiosity, it's like this is different. I want to interrogate this.
And I think that's a big tool for all of us. And I know I have to remind myself, is curious not because I seen a difference, but curious because you are sharing who you are with me. Because that will change how, if you come with a food that I don't know, if I'm curious because you're sharing something, a part of yourself with me, I'd be like, oh my gosh, girl, is this something that your mom taught you to make, or your aunties? I mean, tell me about this dish, because that's about you and the relationship in this dish. But if it's something, if it's curiosity because it's different, then that comes out in the question. Oh, I've never seen this before. What is this? Well, yeah, you can all jump across the table and slap me right now. You all saw the reaction. They're like, right? But that awareness, if we hold normalized dominant identities, having that awareness, it's like being curious because someone was willing to share themselves, and have that be at the forefront, rather than being curious because there was a difference, because we'll reword it very differently in that moment. which I think then, and you all correct me if I'm wrong, but that because then I know a lot of times as we learn our history, we become more aware, then we get fearful. Oh, I don't want to ever do anything or say anything wrong about or bad about your hair.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Oh my gosh, I don't want to do that. Again, that's putting the emphasis on the difference.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but when Nita rocking her hair, I'm like, girl, you are rocking that hair, right? and I have enough relationship. I know you're going to receive that, right? Now, I say that to other Black women that I don't have enough relationship with, and I know that it might not be received because they don't feel my vibe, but 9 times out of 10, they feel the vibe. They're like, thank you. And I'm like, oh, thank you, right? Like, look at what I do. You're winning. I ain't, because I'm up in the ponytail. We joke about it. But again, it's not that you can't say anything. It's saying from that person first.
From an authentic space.
Yeah, authentic and wanting, and it's about that person, not about the difference.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like how you said a word that alluded to emotion. And I was like, yeah, you feel it in the exchange. Regardless of what the question is, you can feel someone's intent.
And I think the celebratory part of that is it's the fun part of life, right?
Exactly.
Like I know I've definitely had wonderful exchanges with white women where it's like, girl, I see them shoes, or, you know what I'm saying? And she'd be like, girl, that hair, right? Like, and there's times when you can be that, but you have to be authentic. And as Black women, us showing up more boldly in who we are, a lot of times gives more white women the audacity to be like, oh, okay, she was cool, but that's on our end, right? Because we've been doing our work. So we're asking and inviting people into this conversation to then do your work so then we can have fun at the playground together, the playground of life together.
Because I'm going to go back to it because it's our history. And so the more we understand our history, the more we can all process and be bold and then be person-centered first, not the differences and not the,
And I love that point. It is such a journey because as you're talking, I'm nodding along and I'm like, I'm not fully at the end of my journey in this.
You never be.
And that
was the cute. Oh, okay. Every listener
above enjoy it, girl.
Every listener above the age of 40 just went, oh, that was sweet. Okay, that was sweet. Yeah, no, it's a journey, and I thought I was doing so well, and then I get in my 50s, and it's like, oh no, okay, whole bunch more to discover. Okay, thought I had that. Nope, yeah. So it's always
lifelong.
It is always, but I like what Nita said before is how insightful you guys already are and how aware you are.
So you have a longer time to enjoy it.
Oh, yeah. So when you're in your 50s, you guys will be
powerhouse
blowing things up.
This is all actually making me think of the one picture phenomenon.
Oh, yeah. And the one picture phenomenon before you go is what we'll do is we will take the identities that are not normalized dominant and we will put them together to get one picture of a person. And we will do it very quickly, and it's statistically often untrue, right? And so I talk about, I was working in Memphis, and I was working with a community that was in poverty, and I was going to this center, and as I was turning my car into the parking lot, I saw a woman, and she had to have been about 400 pounds. So and she was not able-bodied. She was in a chair, and she's about 400 pounds, and that's all I saw. It was a woman, and she's disabled. That's 2 triangles pointing down. I immediately thought in my head, oh, I bet you she's a participant. I bet you she's in poverty, in a participant. And if you would have asked me, I would have probably at the time said, and I bet you she's informally educated. And so I saw 2 identities that were 2 triangles pointing down, and I immediately gave her all the other triangles pointing down. And then I love it. I love the universe. I mean, I caught myself. By the time I parked, I'm like, why did I just do that? Hello. I caught myself. But when we got into the meeting, she was a participant. She had 2 masters. She blew all the other triangles up for me. And I was like, thank you very much. That taught me a lesson, right? In my head, I was saying that. We also do it the other way. So if we see a normalized dominant triangles, we will then put it together and assume that you have the other normalized dominant. Now, I really see this at parties that I attend is people with me, I come in as a white woman, people see me and they'll assume, well, where do you work? That I'm employed, normalized dominant. Oh, they assume I have an education. They assume that I'm middle class or above if I'm at this party. Like, it's just, you can just tell by the questions and how but when I come with like your mom or another person who is Black, there's a couple moments of proving. Like there's questions of, because there isn't that one picture phenomenon right away. And there's a couple moments of, oh, you're speaking formal English. Oh, you're going to be getting your doctorate. Oh, okay. And then so it's that one picture phenomenon. And so why does this all make you think of that piece?
Well, so much of what you're describing in that there are positives or negatives, it could benefit me. For example, when I was a sophomore in college, I was driving to campus for a job interview and I was pulled over. And first blush, I don't know what his perception of me was, but through the conversation, through him asking where was I going, what was I doing, I was able to reveal I was on my way to campus for an interview. And he said, where do you go to school? And I said, the University of St. Thomas. And he said, well, that's a great school. And we started making small talk about St. Thomas. I was able to reveal more of myself. And I was let off with a warning. And I don't know if those things are correlated, but in that experience, I was grateful for the opportunity to provide more context of myself to combat whatever one picture he had in his mind. And then on the flip side, you see plenty of times when the interaction goes a different direction, or when you aren't afforded the option or the opportunity to reveal more of your triangles. And I think so much of what we talk about is that you shouldn't need to. That the one picture, it takes all of your control out of it. And so often you start at like -50 and then you have to climb your way up to even before you're able to actually show or be yourself. And that is it can range from an miscommunication to a life or death situation. Like it's so much work to put on the person to have to manage that and have to reveal more of yourself in order to be treated with respect.
And you either have to reveal more of yourself or you don't have more dominant triangles to reveal. And it's kind of a split issue because we're lucky to be able to reveal these parts that gain us respect and gain us safety in some of these instances. And some people don't have triangles to reveal. So then they're just working off of the one picture phenomenon.
Yep. And the negative descriptors and messages that can come with that.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's a huge point to yours, Heidi, is you don't get the benefit of knowing when someone's going to give you the benefit for all your normalized dominant, for your education, your formal English, your able body, and when people are going to do the one picture phenomenon with your identities that point down. And that I think goes back to your point, Nita, of the health is when you don't control the health implications that brings, because you don't get to control the outcome, as well as you are constantly thinking, well, do I have to reveal this side of me? Don't I? What do I have to do? Thinking about how you show up and ready to answer questions that aren't coming, again, respectfully about you, but questions that are coming about the differences. And so that type of stress.
Absolutely. And I love this language, right? It's when we don't feel we have the control. And a lot more nowadays, we are taking the control of how we're showing up for the most part, right? And what we're talking about is tides lifting all boats, right? The rising tide lifting all boats. And so as we are coming into our own in 2025 and beyond, what we're asking our capacity builders to do with us is come with us.
Exactly.
Right?
Girl, that's what I was thinking. Because if as you're coming into your own, then as I'm coming in, and people who look like me come into our own, and we realize this is our history, and we can hear each other and understand each other better. I mean, what we can accomplish is amazing. And that's why I call the book The Urgency of Awareness, because I think that's urgent. Because right now we're just seeing differences and we're going to name calling pretty quickly.
Yep.
Instead of curiosity, instead of, well, wait a second, where am I coming from? How am I showing up? Where's that other person coming from?
And with the climate that we're in now, right? What is scientific fact, or what is actual happening, is America is browning, right? That's what a lot of people are talking about.
Right.
And so with the browning of America, the urgency of awareness, this is what I love about our podcast and the book that you wrote, is it's so timely right now, because the invitation is being put out there by us for sure, And by what they're like, if people are taking notice to people around them, then they're seeing that, okay, so if I don't become urgent with this, where will I end up? Where will my family end up?
Right.
How do we walk into this future together?
And not repeat history. Not make one identity less human than another identity, because that's what perpetuates the harm, you know. So how do we not repeat history with our awareness? Okay. I want to say thank you guys for sharing your stories, for this amazing conversation. I know I've got things to think about. I am sure listeners do as well. Nita, wrap us out. Take us home.
Man, this is us building capacity builders. Thank you, ladies, for joining us today. This has been such a rich conversation that I was super excited to have once Jody shared that this was going to be the conversation. So as you all could have been anywhere in the world, but you chose to be here with us, building capacity individually, in our community, and institutionally. We will see you all on the other side next time. Thank you for joining us.